Aliens called human training was just a game. Deathworld girl called it a death sentence. The first thing they did when she stepped off the shuttle was laugh. Not quietly, not behind hands or translated politeness. 7 Tharen soldiers stood on the docking platform of the Eternal Meridian and laughed openly at the human woman who had just walked through the airlock with a field pack on her back and a data pad tucked under one arm, and not one of them tried to stop. Lurian, stationed at the far edge of the platform with the other junior cadets, watched it happen. He had seen the new arrival briefings. He had read the entry in the collective's cultural register. Earth. 14 star systems in less than a century. Class standard atmospheric requirements. No biological enhancements on record. He had expected someone who looked significant. She did not look significant. She was 57. He had to convert the measurement twice to believe it. And she wore no armor, no secondary limbs, no cranial link housing above the ear. She had a thermal underlayer visible at the collar of her jacket and a small scar along the left jawline that had healed imperfectly, which meant she had received it somewhere without adequate medical equipment and had continued regardless. He noted this last detail the way he noted everything, quietly, in the back of his mind, where it could sit until it meant something. She looked at the 7 laughing soldiers for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked past them, scanning the docking bay with the steady patience of someone checking sightlines. She noted the guard rotation at the secondary corridor. She noted the ceremonial-grade weapons at the entry doors, functional, not decorative, whatever the diplomats had told her. She noted the positioning of the emergency pressure hatches and whether they were manual or sensor-triggered. Lurian did not know she had done any of this. He would understand it later. Voss stepped forward. He was 7.5 feet of gray-blue skin that caught the dock light like cooling metal, and he wore his diplomatic rank markings with the ease of someone who had never questioned whether they belonged there. He extended his hand to her, careful, controlled, the handshake of an adult offering a hand to a child at a formal occasion, afraid of accidentally causing damage. She shook it like it was any other hand. "I trust your journey was acceptable," Voss said. His translator collar rendered his Tharen consonants into clean English that sounded, faintly, like a news broadcast. "It was fine," she said. "Where do we start?" Voss's expression moved in a way it had not been prepared to move. He had expected admiration for the ship. They almost always stopped at the hull first. The hull plating scattered starlight into geometric patterns that served no tactical purpose and were, by any measure, extraordinary to look at. She had glanced at the hull once when the airlock opened. She had not stopped walking. "I thought we might begin with a tour," he said. "The Eternal Meridian is." "I'd like to participate," she said. "In the trials, not observe." A pause, not long. Voss was skilled at pauses. "We had understood your role as observational, a cultural liaison function." "I know what we understood," she said. "I'd like to participate." They could not find a formal rule against it. This was the thing Lurian noticed 2 hours later, standing in the corridor outside the briefing room where the trial administrators were having a conversation at elevated volume. They had been searching their own records for the past 90 minutes, and there was no formal exclusion in the Grand Trial Charter that applied to non-Tharen species who met the basic entrance requirements. No non-Tharen had ever presented themselves as candidates. The possibility had simply not been written in, because it had not occurred to anyone that it would need to be. She was assigned to the cadet track. The cadet track served juveniles in the Tharen developmental equivalent of 16 to 20 standard years. It was assigned to her as a kindness, or as a joke. Lurian had learned over time that those two things were not always different. He was in the cadet bunk row when she arrived with her pack. He watched her cross the room, past the other cadets who had gone quiet in that way that was louder than noise, and sit on the edge of the narrow bunk and begin sorting through her gear. It was methodical. That was the word he kept landing on. Not hurried, not performed. She laid out the contents of her pack in order: field rations, medical kit, thermal layer, signal relay, small tool roll, and the data pad, which she set aside separately within reach. Then she repacked them in a different order, more compressed, the way someone who had packed in worse places and learned from it would pack. And then she picked up the data pad and opened it and started logging. Lurian was supposed to be reviewing his own materials. He crossed the room and sat on the bunk across from her. "Cadet Lurian," he said, "I have been assigned as orientation contact for your first night." "Nora Webb," she said without looking up from the data pad. "Sergeant First Class, retired," a small pause, "in name only." "I am required to walk you through the Phase 1 parameters," he said. "All right," he told her. He read the Sever biome specifications the way someone reads a warning label, not cruelty, just the hope that if she understood what was coming, she might make a different decision before morning. 60% atmospheric pressure, extreme temperature cycling on 4-hour rotation, cold phase reaching -40 in the lower zones, heat phase peaking at 62 in the upper corridors. Predator drones activated at hour 12. Duration, 72 hours. She listened. She did not stop typing. "The enhanced cadets train for this environment specifically," he added. "Our thermoregulation." "What time does the light go out?" He stopped. "Hour 1, 1800. "Okay." She saved whatever she was writing, closed the data pad, set it on the narrow shelf beside the bunk the way she would set down something she planned to pick up again. "Thanks." He sat there for a moment, waiting for the question he had expected. About the drones, about the pressure adjustment protocol, about the temperature survival threshold for a human without thermoregulation implants. She lay back and closed her eyes. "You are not afraid," he said. It came out less like a statement and more like something he was still turning over, checking from different angles. "I didn't say that," she told him. He was quiet. The bunk room hummed with the ship's recycled air, which smelled of mineral filtration and the faint metallic bite of the ion scrubbers. Across the room, 2 cadets were reviewing holographic trial maps. One of them glanced at her and looked away. "Get some sleep," she said. "It starts early." Blended CTA. She had been in the exercise less than 4 hours when the first cadet dropped. Stay close. What comes next is why 14 star systems weren't enough to rattle them. The transport dropped them at the edge of the Sever biome at 0600. Lurian stepped off the ramp and felt his skin pigmentation shift immediately, the pale blue moving toward gray as his thermoregulation adjusted to the cold. Automatic. He had never thought about it. The biome's floor was flat broken rock with shallow chemical pools between the slabs, the kind of terrain that looked stable until you stepped wrong. The sky was a sickly yellow-green, and the air sat at 60% pressure, which meant every breath delivered less than it should. She stepped off behind him and did not pause at the bottom of the ramp. She was wearing the thermal underlayer and the field jacket. That was it. No pressure assist suit, no thermoregulation band. She looked up at the sky once, the way you look at whether you have already accounted for, and then she adjusted her pack and started walking. Her steps were short, low center of gravity, nothing impressive about them, no long Tharen strides, no ground-covering efficiency, just small, consistent, stripped-down movement that generated no wasted effort. He had seen this pattern in old training footage of endurance specialists on contested terrain. He had thought it looked slow. He fell in beside her. "Your skin changed color," she said. "Thermoregulation, automatic." "Does it help?" "Yes, significantly." She nodded as if she had expected this answer and filed it. "How long before the chemical pools start affecting boot seals?" He checked his wrist display. "The compound is a dilute sulfate. Standard boot seals hold for approximately 30 hours before micropermeation. So I have 29 hours on the pools before I need to root around them." She glanced down at her boots. 31, if these are better than standard." She said it without particular optimism or pessimism, just a number to work with. By hour 6, Cadet Doran dropped a thermoregulation failure presenting as muscle cramping, the cold phase drawing resources away from physical performance. He was extracted without incident. Lurian noted it. The remaining cadets adjusted formation. She did not adjust anything. She was still moving at the same pace she had started. By hour 10, a second cadet, Jarrett, dropped the same way. Lurian had been watching her pack weight. It was wrong. Not wrong in the way of someone who had packed incorrectly, wrong in the way of someone who was lighter than they should have been at hour 10 of a 72-hour trial. He was eating on the standard schedule, full portions at designated rest stops. She was eating differently. Less per sitting, more frequently, in small amounts she took from a side pocket without stopping. "Your ration schedule is off," he said. "My ration schedule is mine," she said. "Standard schedule assumes consistent resupply. I don't plan around promises." "You expect the resupply to fail." "I expect to be ready if it does." She took a small piece of compressed food from her jacket pocket and ate it while walking without breaking stride. Outpost Carver, 3 years ago, 19 days. Relief convoy was destroyed in transit on day 3. We had 4 days of operating on the assumption that resupply was still coming. By the time we understood it wasn't, we were already inside the margin. She stepped over a chemical pool, choosing the center of a dry slab without looking down. "I say that not to impress you. The reason I ration is not fear of this exercise. It is memory." Lurian processed this. "Who taught you?" She was quiet for a moment. Just movement, boots on rock, the faint chemical smell of the pools, the distant hum of the ship's outer systems running below the biome floor. "Staff Sergeant Owen Blake," she said. "He never once stood in front of a classroom." A drone sweep sounded in the upper corridor before hour 12, the faint electrical hum Lurian recognized as pre-activation calibration. He checked his display, 53 minutes early. Lurian's skin shifted again, almost imperceptibly. She stopped walking. She was absolutely still, head slightly tilted, listening to something he had not yet heard. "The drones," she said. "Not until hour 12. They're already running." She dropped flat behind a low ridge without hurry, the movement practiced and immediate. "Get down." He dropped. Across the biome floor, 2 cadets who had not moved fast enough were tagged in the first sweep, a pair of soft chimes from their assessment bands. They would be tracked but not extracted. The drones registered contact, not elimination. Still, tagged was tagged. The drone overhead passed with a sound like tearing paper pulled slowly apart. She was already counting under her breath, 12 seconds. That was the interval. She had counted it twice before he had finished processing the first pass. The drone swept, continued, turned on its axis somewhere in the upper corridor and swept again. 12 seconds between the near edge of one pass and the near edge of the next. She turned to him. "How wide is the open ground between this ridge and the next cover?" He checked the biome map on his wrist display. 70 meters. She did another calculation he could not see. 4 seconds to cross it. 8-second margin. She was already getting her hands under her. "Move when I move. Stay low and don't speed up at the end. That's when people get tagged." "You have done this before." "Not with drones exactly like these." She watched the sky. The hum built and peaked and faded. "Move." She went, not fast, not the flat sprint he expected, but low and efficient, every step deliberate, body parallel to the ground. He went after her and matched the angle because it was clearly correct, and he was learning to trust correct things even when they didn't look right. 70 meters in just under 4 seconds. She flattened behind the next ridge in one motion as the hum rebuilt overhead. The drone swept through. Below it the rock was empty. Across the biome floor, he heard the soft chime of a third assessment band. Cadet Wes, somewhere behind them, had not moved in time. She lay still for another breath. Then she lifted her head and started reading the ground ahead. "You counted during the drop," he said. "You count during the drop, or you don't know what you're working with." The next 30 hours were a kind of education that Lurian had not known he was receiving until it was almost over. She moved through the biome the way water finds low ground, not forcefully, not impressively, but with a consistency that compounded into something you could not ignore. She chose rest stops on high ground with sightlines in 3 directions. She marked water sources by smell before she reached them, which he did not understand until she explained that the sulfate smell changed at the edge of a safe pool. She checked her boots at the 29-hour mark, exactly when she had calculated, and rerouted around the chemical pools for the remaining time. He did not always understand what she was doing while she was doing it. He understood it 2 hours later, when the reason became visible. By hour 20, the Tharen monitoring team had switched to a secondary assessment feed. He learned this later. A detail passed through the cadet block in the way details always passed, sideways and without attribution. The secondary feed tracked her specifically, not because she was performing impressively by any metric the Grand Trials used, because she was not performing at all. She was just moving, eating, resting, and moving again, and the cadets built for this terrain were not keeping pace with her quiet math. At hour 24, she stopped on a flat rock in the dim heat phase light and ate a full portion, not the rationed amount, the full amount, and when he looked at her she said, "Halfway. I can afford it now." "You planned the consumption rate across the full 72 hours. Before I got on the transport." He thought about this. The Tharen approach to the biome was to manage it as it arrived, superior thermoregulation, superior physical conditioning, respond to conditions as they developed. He had never considered planning the consumption rate as a fixed variable. It would not have occurred to him that it was a variable someone needed to plan. She finished eating and opened the data pad and made a short entry. He had stopped asking what she was logging. He understood it was the same thing every time. What she had used, what she had in reserve, what the conditions were doing, what she expected them to do next. Information made available for the next person who needed it. Hour 40. She was the only cadet who had not been tagged once. Jarrett was out hour 10 muscle cramping. Doran was out hour 16, when the cold phase ran long and his thermoregulation drew more from his muscles than it should have. Wes was tagged but continuing, assessment band logging the contact, which would count against his final score. 3 other cadets were still moving, but Lurian had watched their pack weights and their stride patterns, and he knew, with the kind of knowing that had nothing to do with hope, that they would not make hour 60. She was still moving at the same pace she had started. Lurian's own thermoregulation had been working continuously since hour 1. He was performing adequately, above the cadet average for this phase, his instructors would note, but adequate felt like a different word than it had 24 hours ago. He had been watching what adequate looked like from close range, and it was not the same shape as what she was doing. Something in the monitoring team's assessment feed, he pieced this together later, had generated a flag at hour 30 that said, in the Tharen evaluative language that never used plain words when official ones were available, anomalous performance trajectory requiring senior review. The flag had been reviewed. A second flag had been added. Neither flag had a category it fit into neatly. Voss, Lurian learned later, had seen both flags and said, and this was passed along sideways too, the way things always were. We would find that very instructive. He had said it the way an adult says something about a house cat that has learned to open a door. Not threatened, not impressed, interested in a minor, contained way, the way you are interested in something that does not require you to update any of your important beliefs. Hour 72. The transport arrived at the eastern extraction point at 0600, exactly on schedule, and she walked to it. Not hurried, not relieved. She climbed in and sat and checked her hands for cold damage, methodical, thumb across each fingertip in order, and found none. She decided, apparently, that she could eat a full ration now that the phase was complete. She opened her pack and ate it while the transport sealed and lifted. Lurian sat across from her. Outside the port window, the biome's yellow-green sky moved away below them. "You were not afraid at any point," he said. "I was afraid at several points." She finished the ration and folded the packaging precisely. Hour 18, when the temperature dropped faster than the scheduled cycle. I had planned for the cycle timing they gave us. The actual drop was 8 minutes ahead. I recalculated. She looked out the window. Hour 44, when the drone pattern shifted and I had to recount the interval. I was exposed for 6 seconds while I recounted. That was not a good 6 seconds. "But you did not show it." "Fear is information," she said. "You don't perform it, you use it." He wrote this down, in his head where he kept things. Later, he would write it on the data pad he had started carrying since hour 12. The briefing room for Phase 2 was on the ship's command level, and it was filled in a way briefing rooms were not supposed to be filled. Cadets who had dropped in Phase 1 were present. Observers from 2 other evaluation boards had requested entry. Lurian counted 31 people in a room designed for 20 and stopped counting because the number felt wrong, and he checked it twice, and it was still 31. She sat in the second row. She had a cup of water and the data pad. She was reviewing something on the data pad, not the room. Voss opened the briefing. The tactical grid, he explained, was 40 kilometers across, mixed terrain, objective hub at the center. Her team, 8 cadets plus herself, matched against a veteran unit, 12 soldiers with full Grand Trial experience, assigned as the dominant side. He explained the veteran unit's record. He explained the asymmetry. She was still reading the data pad. "The match is designed as an asymmetric assessment," Voss said. "The veteran unit's advantage is structural. The cadet team's assessment comes from how they respond to that structure." She looked up. "So it's designed to be unwinnable." A brief pause. "The parameters favor the veteran unit, yes." "Good," she said, and looked back at the data pad. "I've been in those." Voss's expression moved in the same way it had moved on the docking platform, not where it had prepared to go. The tactical grid dropped them at the southwestern edge at 0800. Lurian had the terrain mapped on his wrist display. She had looked at the same map for 4 minutes before they dropped and then put it away. He did not ask why. He was learning that the question would answer itself. For 11 minutes she did not say a word. He watched her watch. Her eyes moved across the terrain in a pattern: slow right, pause, slow left, pause at 2 specific points he could not immediately identify. The veteran unit was visible on the far side of the objective hub, already in position. Their formation was clean and deep, exactly as doctrine prescribed. Tight hierarchy. Every position assigned. She was looking at the positions. "Tell me something," she said. "The cadets' movement doctrine, how many Grand Trial cycles has it been current?" He checked his notes from the pre-trial orientation. "Approximately 60 cycles." "And the veteran unit has trained against it for how long?" He saw where this was going before he finished the sentence. "Their entire careers. They know every move before we make it." She said it without heat. It was just the shape of the problem, stated plainly so they could work with it. "We are not going to win by being correct. We are going to win by being unexpected." At 11 minutes, the veterans hit the left flank hard. The cadets contracted inward, correct doctrine, wrong context, because correct doctrine in an asymmetric match against people who knew the doctrine was a gift to the veterans. 2 cadets eliminated in 30 seconds. The cadet formation buckled inward the way a correct formation buckled under pressure. She moved to Lurian's shoulder. Left flank holds, right flank goes wide, past the expected engagement boundary, not to the edge past it. That splits our force. I know what the doctrine says. She was watching Finn, the right flank unit leader, a cadet who had survived Phase 1 with his assessment band clean, and had the look of someone who made decisions quickly when decisions were needed. Relay it to him and let him choose. She had said let him choose, not tell him. He relayed it. Finn looked at her across 40 meters of mixed terrain. She gave him nothing, no nod, no signal, just the instruction and the space to act on it. Finn made the call in under 4 seconds. The right flank moved. Lurian turned back to find her gone. She had been there, shoulder to his, and then she was not. He scanned the terrain behind the cadet line and did not find her. He scanned the terrain ahead. She was moving through the center alone, low, using ground cover that existed only if you were moving at her height and her pace, invisible from veteran unit sightlines because no one had posted cover there. Why would they? No cadet had ever reached that position in a standard trial match. He understood, then, that she had been looking at those 2 specific points on the terrain map for 11 minutes. She reached the veteran unit's communication relay node, a small signal post on a low ridge 200 meters inside their operating zone, in 4 minutes. He tracked her on his display because he had added her position marker to his map at hour 12 of the biome and had not removed it. She crouched at the relay for 43 seconds. She did not disable it. He could see from the system read-through on his display that the relay was still active when she left it. The veteran unit's next coordinated response arrived 3 seconds after the moment it had been intended to address. Not every response, not always, but enough responses in enough key moments that the veteran unit began making correct decisions that landed in the wrong places. Finn's right flank reached the outer edge of the objective hub. The center opened. She had already told Lurian what to say when it did, told him during the 11 minutes quietly while she was still watching, and he said it. Finn took the primary objective. The match ended. The administrators confirmed the score, then confirmed it again. Voss was waiting in the staging area. He was not laughing. He had stopped laughing sometime in the last 36 hours and had not found the right expression to replace it with. He looked at her with the careful focus of someone reading a document that was longer than they had expected and kept requiring them to reread sentences. "Your tactics were not standard," he said. "No. You accessed the veteran unit's communication relay. Is it a prohibited action?" He was quiet for long enough that the quiet became its own answer. "It is not listed as prohibited," he said, "because it has not previously occurred." Then it was within parameters. She tucked the data pad under her arm. "What's the command scenario?" He told her, 200 kilometers of operational zone, 17 infrastructure points, 240 Tharen soldiers under her command. Standard completion time, 22 hours. She nodded once. "When do I meet them?" she said. Voss told her, "Tomorrow morning, 0700 final scenario briefing." She said she would need tonight. He did not understand what she meant until the next morning, when the first soldier she had visited the night before, a unit specialist named Pitt, 22 years of Grand Trial service, the most skeptical expression in any room he occupied, sat in the briefing and listened to her differently than the others. Not warmly, just differently, like someone who has already had a conversation and is now hearing the continuation of it. She had started at 1800. She went through every billeting area in the command scenario barracks, all 240 soldiers, 5 to 15 minutes each, moving down the rows with the data pad in one hand and nothing in the other. She knocked before entering. She sat when offered a seat. 3 questions every time. What are you best at? What do you find difficult? What do you think is going to happen tomorrow? Lurian followed for the first hour, then stopped. Not because he was unwelcome. She had not told him to leave. He stopped because he understood, after the 12th conversation, that he was watching something that required him to stay out of its way. Most of the soldiers had never been asked any of those questions. By anyone. The Tharen command structure moved orders down and information up only when it was requested. You did not ask a soldier what they found difficult because the answer was not relevant to the orders they would receive. You did not ask what they thought would happen because thinking was not the mechanism the doctrine used. Execution was the mechanism. She asked anyway. She listened to the answers. She wrote none of them on the data pad that had surprised him the first time he noticed, and then he understood she was not collecting data. She was making contact. By midnight she had reached 231 soldiers. By 0100 she was done. She sat on the edge of her bunk and opened the data pad and wrote for 20 minutes. She turned out the light and went asleep. At 0300, while she slept, Lurian sat at the small desk in the adjacent observation room and replayed the Phase 2 match footage for the fourth time. Not the part where Finn took the objective. The part before it, the 11 minutes she stood and watched. He had been watching her watch and he had missed what she was actually doing because what she was doing did not look like doing anything. He had thought she was planning the relay move. She had been planning the entire match. The relay move was the last piece she confirmed because she already knew the first 9. He wrote this down, not in his head this time, on the data pad he had been carrying since hour 12. Then he noticed something in the footage he had not seen in the first 3 reviews. In the background of the Phase 2 staging area, visible for approximately 4 seconds during the post-match administrator review, Cadet Kororas accessed the communication relay terminal, not to review it, to enter something. He checked the timestamp against the Phase 2 after-action log. The position data corruption that had appeared in a separate scenario, Doran's assessment scenario, which had been flagged as a system anomaly, had appeared 17 minutes after that timestamp. He sat with this for a long time. Then he closed the footage and went to find her. She was awake. She had a half cup of water on the shelf and the data pad open. "I know," she said, when he was still in the doorway. "You saw it." "Hour 22 of the grid phase, before I went to the relay." She turned the data pad so he could see the screen. 3 pages, single-spaced, time-stamped 0219. The observation, the footage reference, the timestamp comparison, the data correlation. Clean, specific. No conclusion stated, only what she had seen in the order she had seen it with every supporting reference attached. I forwarded it to Commander Zethak at 0230. He read the header, not to Voss, not to trial administration, to the senior military commander with authority to act on it. "In our tradition," he said, "loss is addressed through the next performance. You do not document failure because to document it treats it as permanent." "I understand that approach," she said. "And yet." "I wrote the report," she said. "That is the job, it has always been the job." She picked up the half cup of water, held it, did not drink it, set it back on the shelf, opened the scenario parameters on the data pad and kept reading. The briefing room at 0700 was standing room gone. Cadets who had completed Phase 1 occupied the back rows. 2 senior evaluation board members had taken chairs along the wall. Soldiers who could not fit inside stood in the corridor windows. He could see them through the glass, shoulder to shoulder, watching. Lurian counted over 200 people in a room built for 80 and stopped counting because the number felt less important than what the number meant. The ship had decided this was worth watching. She stood at the front and gave unit assignments. Her voice was the same volume it was in conversation. She did not raise it for the room. When the assignments were done, she set the data pad on the table beside her. "You are going to face moments today where your specific order has not arrived yet," she said. "The situation will have changed. The order is still coming, it just hasn't reached you. In those moments, don't wait. You know the objective, make the decision." Silence. Pitt spoke from the 3rd row. His voice had the particular weight of someone who had survived 22 years in a doctrine that rewarded precision and was therefore careful about anything that moved outside it. If the decision fails, the accountability falls to the individual soldier. "Yes," she said. "That is a significant shift from standard command protocol." "It is." He waited. He wanted something more than agreement, and she had given him agreement, and now the room was waiting to see what came after it. "I will document it accurately," she said, "and I will put your name on the correct side of it." Pitt sat back, not satisfied, not yet, but something had moved in him, some internal calculation that was still running. Around the room, Lurian watched the same shift happen in different faces at different speeds. Not belief. Not yet. The beginning of belief, which was different, more careful, more useful. She picked up the data pad. The scenario begins in 12 minutes. The attacking algorithm hit 3 infrastructure points simultaneously in the first 40 minutes. Lurian was watching from the observation level. The Tharen evaluation board was there. Voss was there in the front row, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who had made a judgment call and was monitoring its progress with professional detachment. The expression that said, "I expect to be confirmed." He watched the display. Her units were prepositioned, not at the infrastructure points, near them offset, with clear lines of movement in 2 directions from each position. He had not seen this positioning in any prior scenario review. It was not standard. It was also, he realized, the only positioning that allowed a 4-second response time when the first hits came in. Standard protocol latency: 14 seconds from contact to command response to unit movement. Her units made contact in 4. Not because she had issued faster orders. Because the night before, she had asked 240 soldiers what they were best at, and what they found difficult, and what they thought would happen tomorrow. And they had arrived at the scenario already understanding the objective, which meant when the moment came, they did not need to wait for an order to know what the order would be. The attacking algorithm identified the intentional weak point on the southern perimeter at the hour 1 mark and concentrated against it. It was a well-designed algorithm. Concentration against a weak point was correct doctrine, and the weak point was real. She had left it real on purpose. In the observation level, Voss uncrossed his arms. She released Finn's reserved unit into the gap the concentration had left on the northern approach. Finn moved. No relay confirmation. No order arriving to authorize what was already obviously correct. He understood the objective and he moved, and Lurian watched Voss watch this happen, watched his expression do the thing it had been doing since the docking platform, the thing where it tried to find where to go and did not find it. In 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Finn's unit had sealed the northern approach and established contact with the eastern flank. The attacking algorithm recalculated. 7 minutes of positional adjustment while it searched for a new concentration point, and in those 7 minutes she moved 2 units along the eastern corridor, sealed the southern access route, and consolidated everything around the 9 highest value infrastructure points. 14 seconds of latency would have cost her the eastern corridor. She did not have 14 seconds of latency. At the 4-hour mark, the system registered defending side success. 9 infrastructure points intact. The attacking force arrested at the perimeter it had never broken through. The observation level did not immediately react. Not applause, not noise, just a long moment of people absorbing something that did not fit inside the frame they had brought with them. Lurian heard someone behind him do a calculation aloud in Tharen quietly. 22 hours standard, 4 hours actual, and then quiet again. Voss stood at the front of the observation section, wearing the first fully honest expression she had seen from him since the docking bay. Not managed, not assembled, just a person who had seen something he had not prepared for and was still working on where to put it. He looked like someone reading a document that kept requiring him to go back to the beginning. She was standing on the scenario floor below, looking at the frozen map. 9 points, green holding. She had not moved from that position since the system registered the result. She was not celebrating. Celebration belonged to afterward, and she was still checking whether afterward had actually arrived. "How did you know they would make independent decisions?" Voss called down. His voice was level, professional, But Lurian, who had been watching Voss since the docking platform, heard what was underneath the level professional voice. He genuinely did not know. He was asking because he needed to understand it. She looked up at him. "I didn't know for certain," she said, "but I told them why it mattered. When people understand why something matters, they make better decisions than when they only know what they are supposed to do." A pause. "Doctrine tells you what to do when things go as planned," she said. "Understanding why tells you what to do when they don't." Voss had no answer for this. Lurian watched him look for one and not find it. She was still looking at the frozen map when Commander Zethak came down from the observation level. Zethak had run the Grand Trials for 31 years, 412 cycles. He had the walk of someone who had absorbed a large number of outcomes and learned to move among them without hurry. He stopped in front of her on the scenario floor and looked at the display, 9 green points, the perimeter intact, the frozen position of Finn's unit on the northern approach. "In every cycle I have overseen," he said, "there have been 4 communication-related decision delays per hour on average in the final scenario, moments when an order had not arrived and a soldier waited rather than acted." He looked at her. "In your scenario, 1 delay, in the first 20 minutes before your units recalibrated." She waited. "You gave them accountability," he said, "and you gave them the reason. That combination produced something our doctrine has not produced in 400 cycles of Grand Trials." Another beat. "And before the scenario, you submitted a written analysis of a scenario anomaly to my office. In 412 cycles, no participant has ever done that." "I wrote the report," she said. "That is the job." "You said that last night." He looked at the map again. "I summoned Kororus this morning." She nodded. He confirmed the interference. It had not been reported in prior cycles because it had not been reported. In our tradition, loss addresses itself through the next performance, and what cannot be named does not require a policy. He paused. "You named it. How many cycles do you think it's been happening?" He did not answer, but the question had arrived somewhere it would stay. "I am formally requesting," Zethak said, "a military doctrine exchange program, separate from the cultural exchange, a military priority." He looked at her with the directness of someone who had earned the right to be direct. "There is something in your training culture that our doctrine does not have. I want to understand what it is." She was quiet for a moment. "That decision belongs to people above my rank." "I have already transmitted the request," he said, "to Admiral Grant." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the frozen map. "The transmission delay to the fleet is 14 hours, she said. "Yes. So we don't have an answer yet." "No," he let that sit. "But I have been running Grand Trials for 31 years. I know what an answer looks like before it arrives." He turned toward the observation stairs. "You will want to eat something, Sergeant Webb. It has been a long day." She looked at the 9 green points on the map. Then she picked up the data pad and went to find the mess hall. The answer arrived 14 hours and 22 minutes later. She was in the cadet block, sitting on the narrow bunk, when Lurian brought it to her on his display, the formal transmission from Admiral Grant's office, routed through the fleet relay, received aboard the Eternal Meridian at 0844. She read it once. He watched her face for a reaction and did not find one worth reporting. The transmission said 3 things. "Approved." "Well done." And then, "I knew it had to be you." She set his display on the shelf beside her. She picked up the data pad and opened a new document and wrote the header of the after-action report, the command scenario, the date, her name, her rank. Then she stopped. She looked at the header for a moment. "You are writing another report," Lurian said. "That's the job." She did not look up. "You document what happened. You note what worked and what would have worked better. You send it somewhere the next person can reach it." "Even after a success?" "Especially after a success. Failures are obvious. Successes have things in them you can miss. She typed something below the header. The next person who runs a command scenario on this ship deserves to know what worked today, whether the next person is Tharen or human. He sat on the bunk across from her, the same positions as the first night, which he noticed and did not say. "I have submitted a formal transfer request," he said, "to the Doctrine Exchange Program when Commander Zethak establishes it." She looked up. "I want to understand what you understand," he said, "about writing things down, about giving the reason instead of only the order." A pause. He chose his words with care. "I have been taking notes since hour 12 of the biome. I do not yet know what to do with all of them." "That's normal," she said. "The understanding doesn't arrive complete. It builds one documented mistake at a time." She looked at him steadily. "You'll be good at it." He thought about asking how she knew. He decided that some things were better held and examined later, in private, where they had room to mean what they meant. "When they laughed at you on the docking platform," he said, "you did not react. I have thought about this since day one. Why?" She considered the question with the same care she had given every question anyone had asked her on this ship, the full weight of it, not the quick surface of it. "Reacting to what they expected would have been the most expensive thing I could do in that moment," she said. "They expected offense, or uncertainty, some immediate need to prove myself. Any of those responses would have confirmed that their opinion had weight." She set the data pad down. "And their opinion had not earned weight yet. Has it now?" She thought about Zethak's careful, honest face on the scenario floor, about Pitt, who had asked the accountability question and then sat differently in his chair, about Finn, who had moved without waiting for an order because he understood the objective and trusted himself to act on it. "Some of it has," she said. "The part that did the work earned it." Lurian nodded once. He stood, picked up his data pad and walked to the door. "I will file the transfer request this morning," he said. She was already writing. 3 days later, the Eternal Meridian docked at the Collective's home station for the formal close of the Grand Trial cycle. The closing ceremony was not something she had been told to attend. She attended anyway. She sat in the third row in her field jacket with the data pad on her knee, and she watched Commander Zethak read the formal record of the cycle into the permanent archive. Every commander who had led the final scenario, their name and completion time inscribed in the order they had held it. When he reached her entry, he read it without pause, without additional commentary. Just her name, her rank, and the number, 4 hours. The room was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet when they are absorbing something they will be talking about for a long time. In the front row, Voss sat with his hands folded on his knee. He had been managing his expression carefully for 3 days. He was still managing it. But underneath the management something had shifted. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he was no longer leaning back the way he had leaned back on the docking platform, easy and certain in his chair. He was leaning slightly forward, the posture of someone paying attention to something they have decided matters. After the ceremony, Zethak stopped beside her in the corridor. He had a document in his hand, a printed copy, not a display, which was unusual enough that she noted it. "The Doctrine Exchange Program," he said, "formally established as of this morning." He held out the document. "This is the charter. I have asked Cadet Lurian to serve as the program's first Tharen participant. I thought you should see what it says." She took it. "Read the first page." The charter used the language of military doctrine, precise, formal, specific about scope and authority. But the operative clause, the one that established what the program was actually for, was one sentence: to examine the relationship between accountability, documented failure, and independent judgment in producing military outcomes that exceed the performance of doctrine alone. She read it twice, the second time for different reasons. "That's accurate," she said. "I tried to write it the way you would write it," Zethak said, "which is to say plainly." He paused. "One more thing." He reached into his jacket and produced a second page, a single sheet, the format of a formal collective record. He had this one with him separately, which told her it mattered differently from the charter. In 412 cycles of the Grand Trials, I have added 3 entries to the special record, commanders whose performance required a category that did not yet exist. She took the page. Her name was at the top. Below it, in the formal language of the collective's permanent archive, was a designation she had never seen before: non-standard threat profile. Assessment: insufficient prior category. Recommend doctrine review. Below that, in smaller text, note added by Commander Zethak, Cycle 413, she was holding back. She looked at this for a long time. She was holding back, she repeated, not a question. The relay insertion in Phase 2, he said. You could have disabled it, you did not. The command scenario, you prepositioned units to respond in 4 seconds. The standard latency in your own military's doctrine, I understand from the Exchange Program Preliminary Review, is somewhat lower than 14 seconds. He watched her. You adapted to our timeline. I was a guest, she said. Yes, he looked at the page in her hands. That is what the note means. She handed the page back. He shook his head once slightly. No, hers to keep. She folded it and put it in the breast pocket of her field jacket, behind the data pad. The scenario floor was empty when she went back. No particular reason for going back, except that it was the last full day aboard and she had not stood in an empty room since she arrived. She stood at the edge of the display and looked at the frozen map, the same map, still displayed, 9 green points across a 200-kilometer zone, the attacking force held at the perimeter. Someone on the observation staff had left it running. She opened the data pad. The after-action report was 2/3 done, the scenario mechanics, the unit positioning, the decision latency data, the Kororus section which Zethak had asked her to include in full for the doctrine review record. She added a new section at the bottom, chain of transmission, what this document is for. She wrote, Staff Sergeant Owen Blake taught me to write these. I do not know who taught him. The chain goes back long enough that the beginning doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that it kept going. Write down what happened. Note what worked and what would have worked better. Put the information somewhere the next person can reach it. She stopped, read it back, deleted the last sentence and rewrote it. The information belongs to whoever needs it next. She looked at the 9 green points. The map had been frozen at the moment of success. Every marker locked in the position where the decision had been made. The right call arrived at just before the order could have, and the gap between the two had turned out to be where the whole thing was decided. She saved the document, attached the charter, attached the cycle record, forwarded copies to Zethak and to Admiral Grant. Then she closed the data pad and held it for a moment, the scuffed edges, the corner worn down where she had set it on field surfaces for 12 years, the small scratch on the screen casing from a rock on Valdris 3. She had carried it through the biome, through the grid phase, through the night of 231 conversations and 3 questions each. She set it on her knee and looked out the observation window at the stars. They were the same stars visible from Earth if you knew where to look, distant and cold and entirely indifferent to what happened in the dark between them. She thought about the first morning at Outpost Carver when Owen had sat across from her on an ammunition case with a battered data pad and said, without looking up, write it down while you remember it. Doesn't matter who reads it. Matters that it gets written. She had not understood him then. She had understood him by day 19. Somewhere above her in the observation level she heard footsteps, the particular weight and rhythm of Tharen boots on the grating, more than one set. She did not look up. After a moment the footsteps stopped, and then there was quiet, and she understood they were watching her write. She kept writing. The data pad was open on her knee, the cursor moving, the frozen map green behind her, and outside the observation window the stars held still the way they always had, patient and permanent, and waiting to be crossed by whoever had done the work of understanding why. They thought our training was a game. Turns out it meant something far more dangerous. We were right.